Now for the news in detail. Latin America continues to be the epicenter of the coronavirus as the number of infected people crossed 200,000 in Peru. The global COVID-19 death toll has risen to over 411,000 with over 7.2 million infections. More on that now in this report.
The U.S. is fearing a second wave of coronavirus due to massive protests against racism and systemic inequality. But Southern America is facing the brunt of the virus. The World Health Organization has warned the virus is not slowing down anytime soon in the region.
The situation is that while Latin America has had more time, it will take more time to ensure slowing down the peak, the pandemic, and also reaching the plateauing the curve. It will take more time.
In the Far East, the number of deaths and cases have been controlled in South Korea, Japan, and China. But Beijing has warned that disinformation and finger-pointing is not going to make the virus go away.
Recent days have seen an increase in disinformation on COVID-19, especially lies and rumors against China, which has severely poisoned international efforts. Facts have shown that the novel coronavirus is the common enemy of mankind, but what is more horrible than the virus are disinformation, rumors, and slanders spread by people with ulterior motives.
As many states in Europe ease travel restrictions, Germany is taking a more cautious approach. Berlin has extended its travel warnings for non-European countries until August 31st.
Pakistan has recorded its highest single-day surge in coronavirus cases as 5,385 more people tested positive. Over 113,000 infections have been recorded in the country. The health ministry says 83 people died in the past 24 hours, taking the death toll to 2,255. More than 36,000 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far. Officials say the province of Punjab has reported over 43,000 cases, while Sindh has more than 41,000 cases. Indian troops have martyred 3 more Kashmiris in Shopian district. This takes the death toll to 12 just this week. The civilians were martyred during a cordon and search operation. Indian police and troops have sealed all entry and exit points to the area. Occupation authorities have suspended internet services in the district as well. This is the 3rd violent operation in Shopian since Sunday. Kabul and Islamabad have stressed on the need to further the cause of peace and stability in Afghanistan and beyond. This was agreed upon during the visit of Pakistan's Army Chief, General Qamar Javed Bajwa, to Kabul. According to the military's media wing, the Army Chief discussed the peace process with the Afghan leadership. President Ashraf Ghani hailed Pakistan's initiative of opening the Torkham and Shaman borders to allow Afghan transit goods. He also thanked Pakistan's leadership for facilitating stranded Afghans to return to Afghanistan by land and air routes. The UN says it is concerned over the first airstrike on northwest Syria after the March 5th ceasefire declaration. In a briefing, the bloc's spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said 4 million civilians in the area are at risk after the airstrike. Dujarric said several communities in the southern Idlib province were reportedly hit by air attacks. There are no reports of casualties, but civilians have left the areas that were impacted. Dujarric said the scale of the displacement remains unclear. He said the airstrikes add to ongoing reports of artillery shelling, which also affected communities in the 2 governorates. The EU has called on all parties involved in the Libyan conflict to end military operations and engage in peace talks. In a statement signed by the EU's top diplomats, they urged for the withdrawal of all foreign forces, mercenaries, and military equipment. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, and the foreign ministers of France, Germany, and Italy signed the document. The joint statement followed increased diplomatic efforts by Germany to push for a political solution to the crisis. The Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has reiterated his country's support for the Libyan government in its fight against Khalifa Haftar. In a press conference in Ankara, Erdogan said he will continue to support his Libyan brothers until peace, tranquility, and justice are established. The Russian President Vladimir Putin and German Chancellor Angela Merkel have expressed concern over the escalation of fighting in Libya. In a phone call, the two sides discussed Syria's humanitarian needs. In a statement, the Kremlin said Merkel and Putin voiced support for four-way talks on the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Libya's warlord Khalifa Haftar launched a deadly offensive to capture Tripoli in April last year. Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan says Ankara will not allow Idlib to become a conflict zone again. Speaking in Ankara, Erdogan said the Syrian government is increasing provocations in the northwest Idlib region. Earlier, Syrian jets bombed several villages in the rebel-held region in the first such airstrikes since a Turkish-Russian ceasefire deal was signed earlier this year. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation will hold an extraordinary virtual meeting today over Israel's plans to annex parts of the West Bank. The OIC said the meeting will be headed by the Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud in his capacity as chair of the Executive Committee. The organization said the ministerial-level meeting will follow an open-ended format. Meanwhile, Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh says the takeover will kill any possibilities of peace with Israel. He said it would erode international consensus on a two-state solution. Shtayyeh said Palestine will declare its state based on the armistice lines from before the 1967 war. Israel's Supreme Court has nullified a law that would legalize 4,000 settlements partially built on Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank. In the ruling, Chief Justice Esther Hayut said the law unequally infringes on the property rights of Palestinian residents. It gives preference to the proprietary interests of Israeli settlers. A 9-judge panel voted to repeal the 2017 measure, while 8 voted in favor and 1 against. Rights groups say the measure had legalized more than 50 settler outposts built without government approval. Russia has warned that U.S. attempts to revive sanctions on Iran will lead to a serious crisis within the UN Security Council. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said this during a video conference of the New York Council on Foreign Relations. Ryabkov said it was outrageous how Washington was trying to freely pick what serves its interests. He said the U.S. attempts to nullify the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran not only rejects others' perspectives, but completely defies common sense. U.S. Special Representative for Iran, Brian Hook, says sanctions on the Iranian regime had produced excellent results. Iran's ambassador to the UN, Majid Takhtravanchi, said that U.S. sanctions during a pandemic amount to crimes against humanity. China says it hopes both the North and South Korea will cooperate through dialogue. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying made those remarks amid renewed tensions between the neighboring countries. Earlier, Seoul had said it would continue to abide by the agreement with the North after Pyongyang did not answer a routine daily call to the Inter-Korean Liaison Office. A South Korean Defense Ministry spokesperson said Seoul would follow the agreed-upon principles for peace and prosperity on the Korean peninsula. South Korea's Ministry of Unification said the routine calls and military hotlines are the basic means of communication between the neighboring countries. This is the first time the Pyongyang has not answered a daily liaison call from Seoul since the office was established in 2018. The UK says it will not extend its Brexit transition period with the EU beyond December 31st. During a parliamentary session, the British government's Postmaster General, Penny Mordaunt, said the extension will prolong uncertainty. Mordaunt said there had been no progress on principal issues during last week's 4th round of talks between the UK and the EU. She said there are some very tough areas on which the two sides have failed to withdraw their hardline positions. She said the government wanted to agree on a deal as early as possible to enable businesses to make preparations. Britain left the bloc on January 31st, but is still following EU rules during a transition period to enable a permanent future trade deal to be reached. I'll be back after this break with plenty more news. Stay tuned. Welcome back. George Floyd has been buried in his native Houston 15 days after his murder in custody that sparked global protests against racism and police brutality. The funeral at Houston's Fountain of Praise Church followed a week of memorial services in Minneapolis and the town of Rayford in North Carolina, where Floyd was born. Meanwhile, largely peaceful anti-racism protests have entered their 15th consecutive day. This report has more.
The movement for racial equality and ending decades of racially charged killings in police custody does not look like stopping even after Floyd's burial. A Black Lives Matter group sued the Seattle Police Department to halt the violent tactic it's used to break up largely peaceful protests in recent days. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy said it is planning to ban the Confederate battle flag from all public spaces on Navy installations. Elsewhere, U.S. President Donald Trump suggested the elderly Buffalo man who was bleeding after being pushed by the U.S. riot police was faking his injury. At Floyd's funeral, civil rights leader Al Sharpton called out President Trump, pointing out wickedness in high places.
You take rubber bullets and tear gas to clear out peaceful protesters, and then take a Bible and walk in front of a church and use a church as a prop. Wickedness in high places. You ain't been walking across that street when the church didn't have the boards up.
In the U.S. Senate, General Charles Brown Jr. was unanimously approved to be the Air Force's Chief of Staff, making him the first Black American in U.S. history to lead a military service. Meanwhile, the state of New York introduced a package of police reform measures. The Democrats-controlled state assembly and the Senate passed a ban on police officers using chokeholds and a full disclosure of racial disparities in policing.
We can give New Yorkers the right to go to court to enforce their rights. We can force the NYPD to do more to identify problematic officers. We can send a message that deadly techniques like chokeholds will not be tolerated. Passing these bills is a step in the right direction.
Meanwhile, Paramount Network has cancelled TV show Cops after a 33-year run amid an outcry over how the series depicts policing.
On to Tunisia now, where at least 20 African migrants have died when a boat carrying more than 50 people sank off the coast of Sfax. Officials said a total of 53 people had set out on the boat at the weekend, aiming to reach Italy. Coast Guard units and the Army are searching for the other missing people. Last year, 86 African migrants drowned after their boat capsized, having set off for Europe from Libya. Burundi's President Pierre Nkurunziza has died of a heart attack at the age of 55. A government statement said he was admitted to hospital on Saturday after feeling unwell. His condition then improved, but on Monday he suffered a cardiac arrest, and efforts to revive him were unsuccessful. Nkurunziza was due to step down from the presidency in August after 15 years in power. Nkurunziza faced accusations of political repression at home and abroad since coming to power in 2005. Libya's largest oil field has restarted operations after it was stormed by an unknown armed group, forcing a temporary halt. The petroleum facility's guards announced the decision a few hours after the El Sharara oil field was shut down. El Sharara had resumed production on Sunday after a months-long hiatus. It produces more than 300,000 barrels of crude oil per day, forming roughly one-third of the oil-rich country's production. Khalifa Haftar's forces closed key ports in January, claiming oil revenues were being used by the internationally recognized Libyan government. Libya holds Africa's largest crude reserves, but 9 years of conflict and violence have hobbled production and exports. Asian stock markets are trading mixed as investors tread cautiously and speculate over the health of economies. The Shanghai Composite has lost nearly 0.5% after China's National Bureau of Statistics revealed inflation fell more than the level forecast by economies. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is trading fractionally higher. Seoul's Kospi Index has gained a fraction. The Nikkei 225 is trading marginally higher. Meanwhile, the international benchmark Brent crude has lost nearly 1.5%. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. Well, for the latest updates on these and other stories, you can always follow us on social media at Indus.news. Thanks for watching.